Pink News recently released this article with this incredibly clickbaity title that basically is suggesting that young Gen Z men are becoming more conservative and more homophobic. The article is trying to make this point that men born in the 2000s are far more likely to hold conservative views on LGBTQ plus rights compared to previous generations and women of the same age, a study has suggested. This is not untrue, however, it is misleading, and I'm going to show you why it's misleading. Often news publications aren't doing the research themselves. They're taking other articles, other research sites, and bringing that in, and so you can actually follow it back to its original source. So this goes to the American Institute for Boys and Men, and the American Institute for Boys and Men is a very centrist publication, at least from the research that I was doing. And I think looking at who wrote the article, there is some legitimacy, right? Like, if you look at this, it says 60 Minutes has termed him one of the leading data analysts on religion and politics within the United States. I don't think that that's an unreasonable source for this kind of information. Right away, when you look at the article that the Pink News article is linking out to, there's already some differences in some issues. First of all, this is a study specifically on the religiousness of Gen Z. And one of the main conclusions that they make in this article that I think is really critically important is that it's far too soon to declare a reversal of a decades-long trend of people becoming less religious over time, generations becoming less religious over time. To back it up just a bit, all the research seems to come from Pew's 2025 Religious Landscape Study, which again, the Pew Research Center, good source of information, so that this is probably some legitimate analysis of data that has been presented by Pew. Great. What the Pink News article seems to be getting wrong compared to the original article from the American Institute of Boys and Men is that it really isn't saying that things have gotten a lot more conservative for younger generations, and more so that there's a larger gap than ever between young men and young women within a generation. Down here, it's going to be kind of hard to read, but towards the bottom, it's basically saying that religion is probably not the main driving source. It could be an influential factor, but it's probably not the main driving source for why young men are becoming more conservative. But again, to back up here, if we're looking at what the article is trying to say, is you can see that there's a much larger gap in between the men and the women of the generation compared to. Now, hopefully you're still with me, because this is probably the most important part. Young men in Gen Z are actually not all that conservative compared to previous generations. You can see there's still a major difference between anyone born from the 1970s and earlier versus Gen Z. Yes, Gen Z has gotten slightly more conservative. The young men of Gen Z have gotten slightly more conservative compared to the older generations, though it is still way, way, way farther into the progressive territory. And I'm not saying that we should ignore this drop or this change in more conservative values among young Gen Z men. I think that's concerning, and I think it's worth talking about. But the original article is very misleading. Because even here, acceptance of transgender people is a positive change. Young Gen Z men are the most accepting male group. And I still think it's concerning that there's this drop that has happened here, and young Gen Z men for homosexuality should be accepted by society. But compared to, again, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, like, they are still substantially more progressive than previous generations, except for 90s and 80s, I should say. But anyway, so men under 24